The foul odor of its breath hit Twilight's nose. She grit her teeth and raised the sword to swing it down on its head. One of its tentacles came striking down towards her. Her sword quickly sailed through the air, striking the limb and stopping it from short of slashing her. She poured her magic onto the sword and slashed furiously against the limb. The creature cried out as the spike end of its tentacle flew off, carrying a trail of blood with it. Blinded by the pain, the creature had charged at Twilight, opening its mouth wide, intent on biting her down. The sword moved swiftly down towards her, her magic holding it tightly, with the thrust of the sword that struck the creature, burying itself deep inside of its mouth open. Twilight dodged out of the way as the creature crashed onto the bookshelf, writhing in pain and smashing its head against the bookcase to remove the horrible item that lodged itself down its throat. Her horn lit up and engulfed the sword inside of the creature, swiftly pulling it out of the creature. The creature gagged and roared as the blood spilled from its mouth. Lifting it, it would dare to call hooves in its throat, grabbing for some relief. The single sharpened tentacle that remained and thrashed around haphazardly, striking the books on the shelves in an attempt to defend on its own. Twilight wasted no time and aimed at the sword with a loud cry. She thrust the sword forward, impaling the creature through the side of its head. The sword embedded it down onto the bookshelf behind it, nailing the creature to the surface. The creature writhed in a moment longer, trying desperately to cling on to what remained on its life, before finally falling limp. The tentacle crashed the hardest from the position in the air. Twilight breathed heavily, letting the shock of the moment sink in. She had been focused, had been calculating, and she had carefully seen through the creature's movements that had struck down when it was most invulnerable. "I don't get it, Princess." A young Twilight spoke as she walked through the training grounds with her teacher. "How come your soldiers train so hard in fights when no one fights in Equestria?" She admired at the several stallions, some of them wielding swords in different manner as they struck the wooden mannequins. Some wielded tightened against the wooden practice swords as they sparred with each other, ensuring that they were in top shape. "Well," Celestia fought her words carefully, "it's true that peace has resigned from my rule, and for a very long time now. It wasn't always that way. There are still sometimes when ponies and other creatures would rather settle things with hooves than with words." She spoke solemnly. "But it's not just for those moments. We live in a world filled with creatures that wish to do harm to us. If there's many creatures who would enjoy feasting upon ponies as a snack." "What? Really?" Philly Twilight then looked up at her teacher with sorrowful eyes that scared the idea that something in the world might come to eat her. Celestia then looked down at the sight and softly chuckled. "Never fear, Twilight. I work every day to ensure peace remains in Equestria." The princess smiled sincerely. "And if you are so worried about your safety, you can always partake in practicing your swordsmanship between the downtime of your studies." "Really?" Twilight spoke curiously, looking back at one of the guards. One of the White Pegasus guards, having overheard the conversation, and slowly walked over to the small filly, smiling as he looked down at her. "Oh, hello there," he spoke proudly, but sincerely. Twilight backed up a little, almost frightened. "I heard you've been interested in some sword training. How would you like to try?" he asked, holding out a wooden sword that he had been practicing with. Twilight looked at it hesitantly, before moving a hoof over to touch it. The Pegasus guard moved it down approvingly towards her. She grabbed the sword with both of the hooves as he let go, Twilight dropping down to the ground with the weight of the equipment. She got to her hooves and lifted as hard as her little legs could lift the sword. With the weight of the equipment, she got onto her hooves and lifted as hard as her little legs could lift up the sword, only managing to lift a little ways off the ground. She panted heavily as she gave up trying to lift it. This escalated a little chuckle from both the guard and the princess. "Here, you'll go get a lighter training sword. The ones that we use for when foals are young like yourself want to practice their swordsmanship." The guard smiled, picking up the wooden sword in its teeth and returning it back to the training grounds, heading for the equipment shed. Why are those things so heavy?" Twilight grumbled, folding her hooves together as she sat down on the ground defeated. "It's because the material of a real sword to make them strong and reliable. It also makes them heavy. So the training swords are a little weighed, Celestia smiled, explaining. Have you taken interest in training with the sword? A little. Twilight fought it over her head, before standing up on her hooves and smiling. I want to become a great unicorn magician, and if I practice sword fighting with magic, it'll help me studies overall. She seemed eagerly excited. Besides, if I learn how often magic is, I will need to fight with the sword? Twilight and Celestia shared a small laugh. Is it safe? Spike asked curiously, peeking his head through the corner. Twilight looked over at the baby dragon, seeing his eyes filled with fear. Yeah, Twilight spoke softly, looking down at her medallion. The buzzing had come to a stop. It's safe now. Twilight vanished the sword back into her magic as the body of the creature slumped onto the ground. She stared at it solemnly as the baby dragon slowly walked over to her. The scene was truly sinking in. She had killed yet another living creature, and this time had done it on purpose. But this was also different. As she felt the young dragon wrap itself around her front legs, she was reminded of why she had done it. Right now, she had to protect Spike. She was the adult here, and she had to be one there to comfort him. She had to remember that she wasn't a little filly anymore, and once all this was over, she could mourn over the lives that she had cut short. But then she would have to focus. Her only focus had to be the safety of Spike and returning Ponyville to the way it was been before. Twilight carefully lifted Spike up onto her back and finally walked past the creature. Rounding the corner of the bookshelf, a light fell upon the back of the reference section. She could see a broken down door that would have been lead to one of the study rooms in the back. She walked over to it and pressed her hoof against the door, finding the door broken and lodged in place. There would be no getting into that room. With a soft sigh, she then turned her head and left, and she saw the second door from the back. Though this door looked a little bit to be intact, the third door appeared to be buried behind a pile of discarded books and desks. Twilight then approached the middle door carefully and placed her hoof against it. Her medallion wasn't buzzing yet, with some confidence in her hooves. She had pushed the door open, not certain of what she would see next. The study room was surprisingly well lit, and a lantern hanging from the center of the room. Unlike the rest of the library, the room didn't appear to be falling apart. The rooms were painted with a simple cream coat, with a simple wooden pattern on the bottom. A table had sat in the middle of the room, set up for any pony to come in and start studying. On the table were only two items that sat right next to each other, a few sheets of paper and what looked like a large jigsaw puzzle piece. What's that? Spike asked, looking over the large puzzle piece that lay on the table. It had several lines on it, seeming to be part of a bigger picture. Twilight couldn't help but the picture of what was on the puzzle piece. It looked like it might have been something Merle. Twilight hummed softly, looking at the puzzle piece, before pulling out a sheet from the lobby desk and reading it out loud. I lost them. I can't believe I lost them. Those things are going to guard them now, I know it. Why did it have to be a puzzle? She then looked down at the note to the puzzle piece before making the paper disappear. Spike, I think this is what the note was trying to talk about. Pieces of the puzzle that were gathered together will unlock the door to the back room. Twilight then levitated the puzzle piece back up before placing it in her magic. I guess that makes sense. How many pieces do you think there are? Spike asked out loud. And are they all going to be guarded by those things? A shiver rolled down his spine. I don't know. It's a pretty big piece, so I assume there's not many of them, Twilight pondered, and they might each other be guarded. She put a hoof to her chin, thinking about it with her current predicament. If there was a way to know where the other pieces would be. How about the locator spell? Spike suggested quickly. A locator spell? Twilight then blinked and the bulb seemed to go off in her head. Spike, you're a genius. She smiled as she happily pulled out the map and the puzzle piece. Well, I try, Spike chuckled, accepting the compliment with his usual graciousness. Twilight then flattened out the map onto the table and floated the puzzle piece just above it. Alright, this puzzle is part of whole. I should be able to use this spell to locate the missing pieces of it and show us where they're located. Twilight concentrated on her magic in one piece. The piece slowly began to glow brightly as invisible strings of ether shot out of the library, connecting the separate pieces of the puzzle. The piece then shot down in separate beams, and the light got down onto the map. marking into separate locations of where the pieces were located. Once the spell was completed, she vanished a piece back into her magic and looked over at the map, observing her locations. Alright, it seems like there was only three more pieces to the puzzle. Twilight scanned carefully, checking each other of the locations that had been marked. Two appear to be in the main section of the library, and the third is in another study room. So if we head straight for them, we'll get to the back room quickly. Twilight smiled, placing a hoof against the back room section of the map. I don't know, Twilight. It's very likely that the main section of the library has just become a maze, like the reference section did. Spike then looked over the map a little worried. Well, perhaps, but I guess we'll find out, Twilight said, putting the map away once more. Her eyes fell upon the papers that lay on the table next. Reading a large title that read, "The Cat Who Married a Mouse." She blinked at it, confused, beginning to read it out of curiosity. Once upon a time there was a cat who made an acquaintance with a mouse. They knew each other so well that they grew up to be friends and gained love. They decided to wed. The married couple lived their lives in peace. One day in the summer, they had just realized they needed to store food for the winter. They quickly found themselves a beautiful piece of meat, covered in fat and sealed it in a jar. To keep it safe, they hid it in the jar in the abandoned field so that others could not find it. However, the cat began to long for the meat as it dreamt up to lie to tell the mouse. When the mouse believed in his lie, he went to the meat and ate a small portion. He returned to the mouse with his appetite and satisfied with a bellyful. However, the cat began to soon long for the meat for once more, so he dreamt up of another lie to the mouse, and the mouse began trustworthy, believing the cat, and when the cat went back to the jar and feasted once more in the stored meat. After 2 feasts upon the meat, the day came when the cat was still not satisfied with the prior feasts, and one more dreamt lie up to the mouse. The mouse grew suspicious of the cat, but couldn't leave him once more. The cat returned with the meat and ate the rest of the spoils, leaving none in the jar. When the cat returned and the mouse questioned the cat tried to lie, but the mouse caught wise. As the mouse began to accuse the cat of eating their food, the cat grew tired of questions, so the cat snapped the mouse up in one swoop, swallowed the mouse whole, filling the cat's belly once more. Twilight then looked at the story with a confused awe. The moral seemed confusing, the message seeming unclear, though the story had a beginning, middle, and end. She could not tell what the purpose of the story was written or the relevance that had been near the puzzle piece. Deciding not to ponder on it much longer at the moment, she surrounded the paper and combined it with the other papers that was storing in her magic. Alright, let's get going with the other pieces of the puzzles like that, Spike, Twilight said, confirming their plan of action. Spike nodded in agreement, and they carefully left the study room. They wandered it back to the maze, along from the reference room. Twilight then eyeing the body of the creature once more, that she passed it down, more quickly returning to the main hallway. According to the map of the next piece that was actually fairly close, there was even about 12 books in the main room, and it should be in the walkway between the rows 3 and 4. Twilight spoke optimistically. As she walked into the main room of the library, she could barely see the bookshelves coming into view now. She scanned her light across the shelves, seeing them in the same state of despair, and even the ones in the reference section. Dust was covering several books. She could see grime starting to climb up on the sides of the bookshelf. She moved the light down towards the center aisles of all the bookshelves, hoping to spot the puzzle piece between the second and third shelves. Instead, her pen fell upon the books that was blocking her path. She let out a sigh and scanning her light upwards. A pile of books seemingly unnatural neat and stopped right at the bookshelf. Of course, this area is going to be a maze too, Twilight sighed softly. She turned to her left and walked down to the aisles of shelves 1 and 2, trying to find a way around the puzzle piece. How many more monsters do you think are in here? Spike asked nervously, trying to keep an eye on the darkness around him, though it was difficult to see anything not illuminated by the pendant. I don't know, Spike. I'm trying to think about that right now, Twilight said, trying to shake the thought from her mind. At the end of the row, she could see a line of the study rooms that lined the walls just beyond the bookshelves. To her left, she could see the public bathrooms, and to her right there were more shelves and more study rooms. Each of the doors to the study rooms seemed to have fallen in the same disrepair as the first study and the door she had seen. Well, Twilight then began to think, pulling out the map once more. I assume we'll be able to reach the piece, but the library has turned into a giant maze against us, so we'll have to do is figure out each sections are blocked and which ones aren't, and find our way around. She viewed the map carefully before sighing. I wish I had grabbed some quills and ink before we left. Here you go, Spike said, suddenly producing a red quill and a small bottle of ink. I figured you want them eventually. Wow, I suppose you are my number one assistant for a reason, Twilight smiled, grabbing the items in her magic and dipping the quill into the ink. She began to mark the map with where she had seen the piles of books, and with that in mind, she began to walk back towards the library, following along the wall. She marked off a pile of books that blocked her path between shelves 2 and 3, but saw the paths through 3 and 4 was open. Hoping she would get closer to the puzzle pieces, began to walk down, though. She didn't get far because she saw at the end was also blocked by a pile of books. She softly sighed and marked it off the map. Then she was turning her head back, and she saw particularly a noticeable red book sticking out from the shelves. Curious, she levitated the books off the shelves. The corner read The Old Widow. Twilight opened up the book and see what was inside. It was in a certain large town there lived a poor widow, who sat and thanked everything of everyone she had lost. Her husband, her son, all her relations and friends that she had known quite alone in the world. Her heart grew sorrowful with her thoughts, but the loss of her son troubled her the most, and she wept very bitterly. One day she sat quite still and lost in her thoughts, when she began to hear the bells ringing from the small town hall. She wondered how she had spent all of her night sorrowing, but lighting in her lantern, she went to the hall. She then entered, and she saw already lit up, but not with the usual tapers, but glimmering lights shone through the whole building. It was already filled with ponies who stood, seemingly awaited for the deeds of her day. When the widow walked over to the normal spot, she had found that it was already filled. She looked around at other ponies. She perceived that but they were deceased relations, who just sat there in their old everyday dresses, but with pale and quaint countenances. They neither spoke or sung, but a gentle whisper and hum flooded through the hall. Presently the aunt of poor widow got up and said to her, "Look towards the steps, and you'll see your son." She then looked over and saw her son hanging from the gallows. "See," continued the aunt, "thus it would have happened to your son, if life had given to him. Instead, they were mercifully taken, but they were innocent." With the trembling steps, the old widow went home, and thanks to heavens for mercy. Then, the third day after, she lay down in her bed and died. "What's that, Twilight?" Spike asked, just as Twilight finished reading the story. "I'm not too sure, Spike." Twilight furrowed her brow in confusion, closing the red book. It was sticking out of the bookshelf, and unlike the rest of the books, this one is particularly immaculate. Millicade, a what? Spike asked, confused. "It's pristine, undamaged, and it has fallen to disrepair just like the other books have," Twilight sighed, finishing the book with her magic. "Well then, why didn't you say so?" Spike asked, confused, causing Twilight to softly roll her eyes before relaxing in the aisle. She continued along the wall slowly, marking off the blocked path between the rows of the shelf 4 and 5 before coming to a complete stop between 5 and 6. The medallion had started to buzz once more. Twilight glanced at the lights slowly down the aisles between 5 and 6. The aisles was empty, but the medallion continued to buzz. Spike grew silent as the unicorn began to slowly step through the aisle. She quickly put the map away, pulled out her sword from her with her magic, holding it ready for anything that might happen. She stopped, and the sound of the munching suddenly hit her ears. She quickly looked around for the source, hearing nearby. Then she stopped to see where it was. "Spike, it's behind the bookcase," Twilight whispered, looking to the shelf to her left. A spiked tentacle suddenly broke through the shelves, causing Twilight to jump back and raise her sword over her head. The spike wriggled at least a foot away from her, having to nearly impaled one of them. It seemed to be searching around for something, before coming back to settle it against the books. The creature stabbed right through the cover of one of the nearby books before dragging it through the creature. The sound of the munching rang out loud as the creature seemed to be engulfed another book into its mandibles. Twilight nervously raised her hoof to her lips, turning to look at Spike and giving the quiet shh about the possible as she could. Twilight then aimed her sword to face the bookshelf in case of the tentacle returned to slowly tip-hoof across the aisle as quickly as she could. She froze for a moment when the creature seemed to give a grunt and then stop eating. She didn't move again until she heard it going back to munching at what it found. Twilight soon reached to the end of the aisles. The buzzing in the medallion finally grew quiet. Together, her and Spike let out a collective sigh in relief. That was also too close, Spike said, wiping the sweat off his forehead. Yeah, Twilight agreed, putting their sword away and pulling the map back out. But there should be another puzzle piece right over there. Twilight pointed out past the 6th bookshelf to the wall. Spike then looked at the direction. She was pointing, seeing the familiar-looking puzzle piece sticking out between the books on the bookshelf. Twilight quickly careful to cover the piece with her magic, and carefully pulling it out of the bookshelf. Twilight then looked to her left and the bookshelf, and she spotted the door that led to the back room. One of the doors was a square piece of space that looked like it slotted it to fit 4 separate pieces of the puzzle. See? I told you the puzzle pieces opened the door. Twilight smiled as she summoned the second piece from her magic. She aligned it with the corners of the pieces to where they would fit appropriately in the slot. The pieces fit with a click, forming each of the picture. So we would need to get one of those 2 other pieces, and the door will unlock? Spike said, smiling. It'd be nice if getting the pieces was easier. Twilight sighed softly, returning around. She began to walk down the center aisles of all the bookshelves. When she stopped, hearing the medallion started buzzing again. Oh no, not another one. Twilight softly cursed under her breath and drawing the sword once more. She looked around herself. The door was behind her, 2 empty aisles to her sides. She snapped her head back to the center of the aisle. She saw the creature beginning to walk slowly to her field of vision. 2 tentacles on its back were slowly moving back and forth as if scanning the air around it. The creature's seemingly skinned head was wobbling slowly back and forth, as if it was trying to taste or feel anything around it. The 2 halves of her skin that used to be a head flapped onto its sides as it walked. Twilight then looked around once more in more of a panic. The creature was going to be upon her quickly, and Spike was still on her back. She could feel the young baby dragon gripping onto her tightly, but once more, she couldn't stand there and not fight, not with Spike being possibly put in danger. She had to find a safe spot for him if she was going to fight it again. She turned to her left and quickly ran down the aisle. At the wall, she looked around, trying to find a steady room with a working door. The first door was mangled in a mess of splintered wood, boarded up to prevent entry. The second, however, had a door that looked perfect. Running quickly to the door, she pressed her hooves against it and flung it open. The room was brightly lit, like the last studied room. She entered, consisting of the simple table once more. She quickly moved inside and shut the door behind her, the loud buzzing of her medallion quickly turning into a soft hiss, but never going quite silent. Okay, I think we're safe in here for the moment, Twilight commented quietly, backing away from the door. We'll just wait a moment or 2 and see if the creature passes. It seems like a logical idea in her mind. After all, it didn't seem to be in a hurry, as she could avoid the fighting if possible. She'd prefer, but even with she could still feel in the worry of the creature still being inside of herself, and Nat would become too accustomed to killing living creatures. Hey, Twilight, look over here on the table, Spike said, suddenly pointed to something that lay on the table. Twilight then looked towards it. Isn't that one of the boxes we found in the library? It is, Spike, Twilight said in surprise. There was even a small mahogany box laying on top of it. Twilight covered it with her magic and levitated to herself. If it's here, then it means there must be something inside of it. She gripped the top half of the box with her magic expecting the box to be locked, as she would have to go find a miscellaneous key hidden inside of the box halfway across the library. However, the box opened easily. In the instance, and something out of the box quickly rising up straight and right up exploded against the ceiling. Twilight bumped into the back of the room, to its surprise at the bright up dust that began to fall around the room. "Hey, that's the same as the back of the library," Spike said, standing up and back and pointing at the dust, "right after the princesses showed up." Twilight was going to say something, but the room itself seemed to grow visibly warped and deformed. She could barely keep a track of the configuration when everything had changed, turning into what seemed to be like a castle, though not the same castle as the one in Canterlot. "Thou'st heard? That unicorn is coming to the palace. These stories of talents have spread fast across our lands." The regal voice of Princess Luna was heard, walking with her sister down a hallway towards the castle. "He returns to us from his journey. As it has said, he has bested as the dragon of Apocalypse. We all have heard of these stories, and if his words are true, we may have many reasons, but to be grateful for his powerful stallion," the eldest regal sister said. She had spoken the return of her sister. "For one, he has what we could not, and the dragon Apocalypse is a mighty foe. For one that would otherwise have been bested by combined unity under the elements of harmony." "That's exactly what we speak of, sister." Luna put her hoof down with more force, then stopping in place. Celestia quickly turned around to look at her younger sibling. "What force would be best for the elements of harmony?" "This is impossible, I say. There is no such force than the outshine them. I sense the treachery in the deceit, dear sister." Celestia was quiet for a moment, considering her sister's anger in her words. She looked over towards the ground before looking back up at her sister. "The feats of heroism are astonishing indeed, but I dare not to rule out the possibility of his words are true. Perhaps it was not a force greater than the elements, but something more despictive. Perhaps maybe he did not the best dragon with power, but wit." Celestia then smiled and tried to comfort her sister. "We all shall reserve our judgment until we see the stallion with our own eyes. His presence shall be one of suspicion and disbelief." Luna then raised her head as she walked past her sister. Celestia could only smile and softly shake her head as she followed her younger alicorn. They approached the large, majestic doors, with a single grace of their magic opened wide, revealing the spacious throne room. Guards stood at the attention of near the throne room. Chairs as the two sisters took their seats. Their presence was regal and imposing, befitting the rulers of the land. "Guard, fetch us for the unicorn that has come to us to see today," Luna decreed to one of the nearby guards. The soldier saluted before spreading its wings and flying into the opposite end of the throne room. While the regal sisters had come in to the back room, the guard had opened the doors to the front where they were awaiting the guests to speak to the royal sisters they await. Upon the doors opening, a pony began to make its way forward. Its body wore a dark blue cloak with a hood that stretched over to cross its face. Around its neck was given a golden necklace. A center of it was blue octagon gemstone. The pony approached the throne and just stopping short just before bowing before the princess. "We welcome free breathed stallion," Celestia spoke first, settling the regal one. "Though you may stand and speak with us. And let us see thee face so we know thee better," Luna added, prompting a look from her sister. "But of course, your majesty." The stallion then spoke clearly, as his voice deep as he stood and bowed and raised his hoof up, pulling the hoof out of his cloak to reveal himself. The unicorn had a blonde, light blue coat with a long mane of gold. Beard of form began to under his chin, and the face just looked freshly turned stallion. He did not look as strong, although he had the body of a youth, yet his eyes pierced fiercely with the blue eyes stare ice, as if in his short life and had seen and learned much. "My name is Marilyn Abraxas. I have come to the castle as the royal sisters, so I may speak with thee. It is an honor to meet you both." He bowed once more. The feeling is returned. For a pony whose name is heard across the land, we are honored to have thee meet. Celestia smiled as Merlin came back up from his bow. Yes, the feasts have amazed us all. Tell us the tales are true, such as a pony, the vanquish of the dragon of the apocalypse, all the self. Luna then cut straight to the chase, not wanting to have him delay the question any longer. Is it true, my lady, and knowledge shall now longer be a threat to our land? Merlin spoke clearly. Without a moment of hesitation in his voice, the quickness of his reply seemed to have astonished Luna. Analgia, who pray is Analgia? Celestia, yeah? Luna then narrowed her eyes at the suspicion unicorn. Oh, pardon my manners. Merlin swept some of his hair out of his face so he could direct this conversation more clearly. Analgia was the name of the dragon I have discovered when I first came to confront the creature. And how did you take down such a creature? Celestia asked, as curious as her sister. Yes, it is a tale we would like to hear, Luna added, wanting to hear more of Merlin's words. It is the one I shall share, nor will it take much time. The dragon apocalypse, was trying to destroy our lands, leaving destruction in his wake. No pony could stop him, and all diplomacy was not for that. He knew to hide and escape from you, the royal sisters, but feared the non-common pony when he destroyed the village. I had visited, and I tracked him down to his newest home and saw him face to face. Merlin began to tell his tale. He did not swallow the burn the flesh. Luna puzzled at him, ever skeptical of his tale. He did not, for his curiosity had piqued. He had asked what a foolish pony thought he could do was to ever heard the words before I die. So I spoke to him plain and true. I was there to stop the fiendish deeds and to save our fair ponies and the world alike. He did not strike these sounds where we stood. Luna winced once more. Nay, your majesty. Instead he bellowed with laughter. He raised a hoof and closed his eyes, giving the impression of the aristocrat. He thought it hilarious that a common pony hit by himself would defeat such one. Merlin then just put his hoof back down and looked back at the princess. So I told him what we would offer him a challenge, and interested and asked what it was. I told him that if I could present to him an item that he would not destroy, that he would lose his power and be forced to live the rest of his life, but as a fair earth pony, he'd break my item. I would give him all of the powers, strengths of a unicorn. What? Luna roared loudly across the chamber halls. If the dragon apocalypse acquired to the power of unicorns, then the world would end but under instance? Dear sister, calm thee self. Celestia spoke clearly, as Luna realizing she had acted brash. Let us finish this tale. Very well, Luna calmed herself down, sitting back down. Tell us the rest of the tale. But of course, your majesty. Merlin adjusted the hair out of his face once more and continued to speak. The dragon was confident, knowing his power could shatter anything in the land. He agreed to my game, and I cast a pact of forming spell to ensure that whoever won our game would give up on their bet. This is where I learned the name of the dragon, the one I must speak the true name to the pact to work. He then asked me to present an item, and then from the cloak I drew this. Merlin then reached into his cloak and pulled out a large black scale. What, pray, is it? What is that item? Luna asked, not recognizing it. It is everything that cannot break, for the Angelica, who is the magical power within him, to break anything, cannot break but one thing, the armor of its own hind. Merlin then held the scale a little higher to behold. This is a scale from its back. During my travels, I witnessed the dragon several times, studying his true nature. During one of those items, his scale fell off from his back. I may not know why it fell, if so interpretable shell of its best. But within the possession, I challenged him to my own game. Merlin had put the scale way back in his cloak. So try as I might, with crushing fists, gnarling jaws of fire of magma, he cannot break the scale. Then what became of the dragon? Luna asked, demanding to know more. True to the pact that he may not be own scale, The spell activated and his power was stripped from him, and his body had changed to that of an earth pony. With no way to change it back, I left him to his cave and wallow in his new form. Merlin smiled. And thus ends the terror of Akshna, the dragon of apocalypse. If these 5 words are true, then there must be much to celebrate. Celestia smiled, amazed at the tale. Once we have confirmed the end of this nightmare upon our land, we must hold a feast in your honor. I would be, by most honor, hosted a banquet by you, your majesty. Merlin bowed once more. But I'm afraid there is something else of grave importance I came to speak of thee with. Speak away, with my subject, with whatever the 5 words you have earned in this room. Celestia spoke once more. Very well, I shall speak of a message. First I'll tell you why I came. Merlin cleared his throat quickly, before turning his head, as if not looking at either the royal sisters, but at some pony that wasn't there, yet as though they would be there for him to look one day. Twilight, Merlin spoke clearly. Though you must find the rest, the memory is the key.